What can I say about Zelda Breath of the Wild that has not already been said? My hope is that someone who may have recently acquired a Nintendo Switch is watching this review. I hope to put into words how it felt to play Breath of the Wild for the first time. Zelda Breath of the Wild is a truly transformative endeavor for both Nintendo and the series as a whole. Since the release of A Link to the Past in the early 1990s, the Zelda formula had become more and more rigid. With Breath of the Wild, Nintendo has chosen to discard many of the things that made a Zelda game. The result, an open-world adventure unlike anything you've ever played before, is a remarkable achievement and one that is truly worthy of what many are calling the game of the generation. Perhaps some of my fondness for the game comes from how long it took to go from announcement to actual release. Originally revealed for the Wii U in a January 2013 Nintendo Direct, footage of the game wasn't released until a year and a half later at E3 2014. And it wasn't until the Switch released in March of 2017 that Breath of the Wild was finally available. That is over 4 years from announcement to release, with multiple delays in between. With a wait that long, hype levels for Breath of the Wild were at a level that one would think that the game would never be able to live up to. To further stoke the flames, during the Switch reveal, Nintendo released what is widely considered to be one of the best game trailers ever made.
Tells me that you have no recollection of me, however.
I think you are now ready to hear what happened 100 years ago.
Everything I've done up until now, it was all for nothing.
Here it comes! You must save her, my daughter.
Not only did Breath of the Wild live up to the hype, it far exceeded it. Now that the game has been out for, as of this time, nearly 2 years, some of the changes that made it great aren't questioned. These represent huge leaps for the series, such as the ability to climb everywhere, no unique items in dungeons, no order of completing dungeons, a truly open world, and more controversially, breakable weapons. The game dumps you right into the world with no explanation and no tutorial. It only gently guides you in a general direction. There is a small part of the map you are limited to initially, consisting of about an hour or two of exploration and quests, but then the entire game world is opened up to the player. You truly can go anywhere, even to the final boss, if you're good enough to make it there. Breath of the Wild starts with a very high difficulty. Enemies can easily kill Link in one hit, and there are extremely dangerous parts of the map that are not safe to traverse until dozens of hours into the game. If you are a truly skilled player, you can venture out into the unknown, but the game does a good job of providing a general path forward for players who want at least a little linearity to their adventure. However, sticking to the beaten path proves to be a challenge in and of itself. There are shrines, valleys, ruins, hills, mountains, caves, canyons, labyrinths, towns, and more that beckon Link. One could spend 100 hours in this world just wandering and completing shrines. On top of every hill or at the bottom of every canyon, there may be a Korok seed, a key item used to increase your inventory slots. They reward exploration in a small way, but the real reward is the journey. There is a truly compelling gameplay loop in Breath of the Wild that consists of climbing, reaching the top of whatever you climbed, and then jumping off and floating far away toward the next interesting point in the distance. It is sublime fun and never gets old. The world is so huge with so much to see that it will be hundreds of hours until you run out of locations to explore or have experienced all there is to see in the distance. Hyrule has numerous biomes to explore, making the world feel truly alive. Animals and people live in all of these and dress and act appropriately. Local flora and fauna, weather patterns and temperature, and topography all lend to a sense that this is a truly handcrafted world, but it is filled with real inhabitants. It is clear that an inordinate amount of development time was dedicated to the game's physics system. Rocks and bombs roll down hills, fire burns wood, arrows eventually fall to the ground, wind affects how items interact with it, and so on. In fact, one could say that the physics system is part of the reason that the game is as good as it is. It encourages player agency in a way unlike most other games do. If you wonder if something is possible in Breath of the Wild, and then you try it, chances are that yes, it does work. Coupled with exploration, the ability to change or affect your surroundings leads to an unparalleled sense of freedom most games simply do not provide. Every enemy encounter can be solved through a variety of means. Shooting from afar as an archer, sneaking in under the cover of darkness, sailing overhead and dropping bombs from the sky, blowing up explosive barrels, or simply running in swinging swords. The game makes most enemy interactions approachable in this way, so the player always has something new to try. Speaking of combat, the most controversial addition to Breath of the Wild is breakable weapons. There seems to be two camps regarding this change, and I am in the camp that enjoys and understands it. Breakable weapons forced me to try new things, continue exploring, and become more powerful without having to level up. I understand the frustration that some may have, but there are so many weapons and variety of weapons in the game that I do not think this is in any way a bad change, and I lean more toward it being an asset to the experience. The game has dozens of quests that range from the typical fetch variety all the way to hours-long and very rewarding experiences that I don't want to spoil. They may lead you to a shrine or to new armor. There are a lot of them, but they never become unmanageable. Simply put, this doesn't become quest list the game. I appreciate the approach Nintendo took, and the quests were, for the most part, enjoyable, though not all of them are entirely memorable. The music in Breath of the Wild can best be described as complimentary. Far from the bombastic and amazing trailer music, most of the music you often hear in the game is meant to further encourage exploration. There are a huge variety of tracks, and yet you won't really remember them as you would in a typical Zelda game. It totally enhances the game, but not in the usual way one would expect. It is hard to imagine how exploration would have felt with more dramatic music. So, while I do wish there were some tracks that were more memorable, what the team went for undoubtedly works, so it is hard to criticize the final result. Beyond simple exploration, there are 120 shrines that dot the landscape. Most of them provide the player with the puzzle-like gameplay that typical Zelda dungeons used to provide. There are some real gems among these shrines, some of which take 20 to 30 minutes to complete. Unfortunately, there is also a large amount of extremely simple shrines, infuriating motion control shrines, and boring combat shrines. I'd like for a sequel to have maybe 50 to 60 good puzzle shrines and then drop the rest. There are 4 divine beasts, previously called temples or dungeons in older Zeldas, and 5 if you include the DLC, and I enjoyed some more than others. I would have appreciated different themes for each dungeon, and some were wildly more difficult than others. That said, the general experience leading up to actually entering a divine beast, a process different for each one and which takes several hours, makes conquering each one a more memorable event in your quest. I don't want to spoil any of them, but they are worth playing, and they help flesh out the story. Speaking of the story, it is sparse. Though there is at least 30 minutes worth of cutscenes in the game, they are spread out across hundreds of hours of gameplay, making the story simply feel like an afterthought. That said, there is incredible environmental storytelling everywhere you look. This includes destroyed towns, ruins, flooded basins, ancient carvings, and so on. Not to mention Hyrule Castle, which is in a class of its own. If you have the patience and like to explore, there are plenty of things within the world that fill in the gaps that a more fleshed out story would have provided. Bottom line is that the game is about the player, not about the story. This was intentional, so I do not see it as a major flaw. One additional aspect of the game that I feel deserves criticism is the final boss fight with Ganon. Simply put, it is far too easy, and it is clear that the team didn't actually mean for this to be a challenge, but it is disappointing nonetheless. This is assuming, of course, that you've played and completed all 4 Divine Beasts, which I did. Your mileage may vary. Finally, by now all DLC has been released. It is, in my opinion, worth the cost. Within the DLC, you will find additional story context in the form of journals, the hero's path, the 5th Divine Beast, a lengthy trial to upgrade the Master Sword, and other miscellaneous quests and gear. The 5th Divine Beast, one of my favorite in the game, is worth the price of the DLC all by itself. Though it may sound like I have several complaints with certain aspects of the game, when looking at the complete overall experience, these issues simply pale in comparison. The issues I have with the game are minor and really do not detract from the overall experience. That experience is one of the best I've ever had in a game. The only other game that even comes close was Zelda Ocarina of Time. I thought the feeling I had playing that game for the first time would never return, yet here I was, 20 years later, and Breath of the Wild made me feel that sense of amazement and exploration all over again. I simply cannot put into words how much this game captivated me, and I would pay good money to be able to go back and play it again for the first time. Breath of the Wild truly is a once-in-a-generation game, and deserves to be in the discussion of best game ever made.